Wheel of Genre, the show for readers who have seen the future and know that it's going to look a hell of a lot like the past. Each month we spin the wheel and land on a different idea, author, or genre. And right now we are reading books about AI, including this one, Neal Stephenson's The Diamond Age. I'm Zach, and this week I am really excited to talk about genre conventions. This thing is SF. It won the Hugo, of course. But it's pulling in so many other things that I think it's really worth spending our time kind of picking apart what's going on here.
I'm Bob. I just love Neal Stephenson, Zach. Every time we read a Neal Stephenson book, they're so long. But it's they're really fun, and I'm always excited to come home, open up the book, and start reading, start listening along while I read. They are so immersive, and while there's a lot of stuff that will sometimes go over my head. There's science fiction elements that are eventually treated so well that they become simple for you. They start off complex and you get to know them quite well. And I was so interested in the way that artificial intelligence works in this book as a book that learns from you and also teaches you at the same time.
Totally. And that aspect felt the most prescient for me. And I guess one of the many ways that people are using AI in 2025. But before we ractorize the plot of this book, what do we know about Stephenson?
Stephenson is great. That's what I know. We've read Snow Crash, and I read it, I think, in college, and then we read it when we were doing just the radio of Wheel of Genre twice. So fun. And I think one thing that Neal Stephenson doesn't get appreciated enough for is, I guess, how much delight he tries to give, or he does give his readers. So yes, he does hard science fiction. Yes, I think he worked for Blue Origin, Amazon's space ship company. He's done lots of talks for different scientific organizations. So he really knows his sci-fi. But I think another thing too is the characters are so heroic in ways, they're so interesting, and you just need to know more about them, and you need to hear their story when you're reading. So I think, I never noticed this before, but I think Neal Stephenson is really similar to Charles Dickens. Like, I know this is a Victorian...
I was going to say the same thing.
He gives you someone they're growing up, they suffer so much, but they become the hero of their tale, and they also just become like the most amazing character of every book. Hero protagonist in YT, in Snow Crash, and now Nell in this book. He is such a good writer, and I don't think he gets recognized enough for the quality of his writing.
Yeah, and so Snow Crash was 1992, and Diamond Age is 1995. So this is really coming fresh off the heels of Snow Crash. And for me, I don't remember that Dickinsonian element to Snow Crash quite as much. Actually, it felt a lot more in debt. Like, looking back on it, now that we've read Dangerous Visions, the Harlan Ellison edited anthology of the new wave of science fiction, I personally feel that it is playing a lot more in the same ballpark as like writers like Philip Jose Farmer, for example, or, any other writers who are basically like working in the new wave, but wanting to make it weird, wanting to fold in this kind of far vision of what humanity can become. But what I'm wondering is, and I really want to read more Neal Stephenson with you to find out an answer to this question, is we both identified this kind of Charles Dickens element to this that goes beyond just the surface level of talking about Victorians and fancy top hats and stuff. I'm wondering if as he writes, and he does research, is he not just pulling in the objects from places to populate his novels, but is he also unconsciously or very self-consciously emulating the form of those novels, introducing this large cast of characters, having them travel and meet each other and interact with each other in unexpected ways, for example?
Two things that I know about him as far as his writing process that might lend to him being sort of Dickensian, or his stories being Dickensian. He writes by hand, which I think is quite cool. He doesn't really use a word processor. At least he didn't 3 years ago for the last 25 years. So mostly writing by hand. He even does his editing by hand. So he'll go back through his manuscript, paper, and cross things out. Another thing too is he's really interested in plot. And he says, if you don't have plot, you don't have anything. And I think that's why sometimes people will not be as interested in Stephenson. I think they miss the plot for the character, the plot for the forest for the trees. It seems like he's not interested, whatever I'm trying to say. It seems like he's not as interested in character, but he really is. And that's why it feels Dickensian. The main character, Nell, in this book, she has the worst life. She and her brother Harv have just the worst life possible. They live in the slums. Their mom is kind of in and out of the house. Lots of different boyfriends come in who are just the worst people ever. So they feel like some of those characters in Dickens. They come from very tough situation, and then they have to deal with getting a lot of power, and then a lot of power being taken away, and then having a lot of power, and a lot of power being taken away. It feels the same. And the kind of joy and tragedy that both Stephenson and Dickens are able to work into their stories is very unique. I don't really know how you can get that much tragedy and still have a hopeful character and leave your reader feeling hopeful as well. I think that's quite rare.
Maybe it's kind of like a pendulum principle. You swing your characters as far into the tragedy as possible. So when they come out of it by the end, it just feels so hopeful and so joyous. But I want to pick up what you said about the plot being difficult, missing the forest for the trees, missing the character for the plot. Because I remember when we read Snow Crash, a lot of people said to me, we're like, oh, that's a hard book. That is a book that is very difficult to understand what's going on. And I could not finish it, lots of things like that. Oh. And I remembered what everyone said as we were reading this now, because about halfway through, I was like, oh my God, like how many notes am I supposed to be taking on all these characters? I can't remember who this person is. I can't remember who that person is. I had to look up a guide at one point, but at the end of both novels, and I didn't remember this feeling until finishing this book, I walked away with this feeling that actually the plots of these books are quite simple. Like it's a very standard plot. And I don't mean that as a negative thing. Actually on the contrary, I think that Neal Stephenson is very wise to load us up in this world of new words and new concepts and new ideas and all of these characters. But it's actually a quite simple, very standard plot. And I think it helps keep you on track. And I think it helps regulate the kind of emotions, your emotional reaction, because the beats of it already.
I mean, there's tons in Snow Crash and this book that just totally go over my head, but I'm willing to accept that because I'm happy going forward. I mean, there's so many elements in Snow Crash. I think it's just about Mesopotamian language. And it's this long analysis of how it relates to the spread of digital information. And then this is all about nanotechnology. I watched a really great video. Let's see, his name is Dr. Peter Allen. He did a review on this, and he actually studies nanotechnology. So he was explaining some of the like the nanobot elements of this. I don't know what's going on with that, but it's cool as hell. He was saying so. I guess Stephenson had an idea for this book after a book came out in, let's say, it's 1959 Speech by Richard Feynman or by Drexler. Anyway, two scientists talking about how nanobots will become ubiquitous, and you can basically, like in this book, you have many huge 3D printers. And because carbon is so manipulable and it's so cheap and it's everywhere, if you have the energy and you have all that carbon, you have the desire and the design to make something, you can make it. So everything becomes very accessible because you can make houses quickly for people. You can make vehicles quickly for people. You can also make crazy, terrifying weapons like Bud, one of the boyfriends in that mix. You can make all of these things really, really easily. You can make food like in Star Trek, the
replicators.
Oh, great. Yeah, the replicator. Thank you. Hot. So they have replicators basically everywhere. And so Dr. Peter Allen was saying it was really interesting to him for someone who is actually studying nanotechnology, because he says, okay, I went into nanotechnology being really positive and thinking if we can eliminate scarcity, if we can make just an abundance so everyone can have access to anything when they need it, that would be great. But then seeing what actually happens and seeing the kind of pessimism inside of this book, even though it's a very hopeful book. It's a world of pessimism, because even though we have these nanobots and we have the ability to have extreme abundance, there is what he calls artificial scarcity, because people want to still make money. So they make sure that things are scarce so they can still manipulate people to get work out of them and to get more money out of them.
And maybe that, we can tie that back, that joy and that sorrow, back to something he says about subtlety and ambiguity in this book, because he makes this really good distinction between education, which is like the memorization of facts, and intelligence, which is the ability to handle subtlety and ambiguity. It's kind of like Roca's negative capability, actually. Something that Dan Simmons, I think we may have recorded something about Dan Simmons also talking about this concept too, but just the ability to hang in a state of suspended ambiguity as being like a marker, or maybe like as a prerequisite for making good art. I think that what Simmons is doing here is really interesting, because he's neither condemning nor endorsing any one aspect of nanobots or AI tutors or the typing heavenly rebellion or anything like that. It's a very much a story that's just kind of like exploring, showing a little bad, showing a little good, and kind of like trusting that the reader can kind of make sense of it for themselves without having to like attempt to give rhetoric on why or how they should feel about anything.
Yeah, which is super interesting, because it's a book about a didactic book. It's a book about a teaching book. Yeah, we did talk about the negative capability. Keats talking about negative capability, and then we also Keats, but because that's in very much part of Hyperion. But the idea of the intelligence really bothered me, because I read that. I was like, oh, I'm not intelligent. I texted you about that. Oh, that was depressing, because intelligence is defined by being able to but being able to deal with different systems of information. So a very complex thing. I cannot do that. So, but regardless of that, I think you don't necessarily have to be familiar with all of these things to enjoy this book. And I think, like you said, there is not necessarily a judging of every piece we're going through, but there are some really bad actors, some bad people in this story, and then we have a few really, really good people in this story. So no matter how pessimistic or no matter how futuristic or crazy this world gets or this setting gets, we still have people trying to do their best. And I think the book is so cool in this. It's the young woman's guide for just learning, and it's what the main character gets. Her brother accidentally steals it, because it's a very new piece of technology that works like AI, learning from someone, teaching you while it learns about you. But it also like accesses what they call a kind of public collective unconscious, and it uses those pieces, but then to work with your personal unconscious and puts these things together. So for example, Nell is this little girl. She's like 5 or 6, I think, when the story starts, and she has these 4 stuffed animals. When the book learns what the stuffed animals are named, it starts putting them inside the book and representing them as being real creatures. So there's a dinosaur, Peter Rabbit, Purple, and they all show up in this book with Nell, and they go on these crazy adventures. And as you progress through this book, they kind of teach Nell different life lessons that really help her in the real life of the book too. And sometimes it's kind of hard to distinguish the two. But for example, they show her, like, she and her brother go out on this adventure. They finally escape their terrible lives, and they are in the middle of nowhere. And the book teaches her, okay, here's a stranger. What are you going to do? Are you going to go off with the stranger? And she doesn't really know how to say no to an adult. So the book kind of shows her again and again. She's been captured by pirates. These terrible things are happening. And then finally, in real life, a real stranger comes, and she knows how to deal with the situation. And through all of these experiences, she becomes like this crazy hero. She's really cool. But I thought that was so cool. The book almost being prescient in a way, teaching her something, and then she uses that skill and can go forward in the adventure.
Right. For me, this was like a completely new idea that I haven't heard like any of the post-publication discussion really talk about this idea that like you can't learn anything, or maybe that's not the right way to put it. The best way to learn something, the best way to transmit information from person to person is not through like explicit information. It's through activating the kind of like unconscious symbols, archetypes, or like projections onto dolls, things like that. Like it's through activating that kind of like unconscious fantasy generation that's already going on in anyone's mind. And that, I mean, that's probably why stories are such like incredible teachers of us. You learn so many life lessons from books, for example, that if someone were to just tell you the moral of a story, it probably wouldn't sink in the way that a book is going to teach you something about life in the world and allow you to see patterns in the book that you can then apply on to normal everyday life. But now that I know this information, now that I've internalized this from Neal Stephenson's book, I'm now looking around me like, okay, now how do I apply that into anything, literally anything that I'm trying to do?
He has an idea about story. Neal Stephenson does, about stories being kind of part of evolution. So his explanation is, well, if you can tell a good story around the campfire and teach the people in your group, don't go over, there's lions over there, don't go over there, and you tell a compelling enough story, people will remember it, and they have an evolutionary advantage. They're not going to go over there and get killed by the lion. So stories for him are very important for the development of humanity. So not just for entertainment, but also for survival. And I think also this idea of universal characters, I guess, showing up in different guises was also really interesting to me. So those stuffed animals that we mentioned earlier, they seem to be tied to different figures, and they talk even about the trickster figure. And as Hackworth is the developer of this book. The book has gone missing, but they're looking at how it works, and he explains, okay, folklore consists of certain universal ideas that have been mapped onto local cultures. And then he describes a few different kinds, trickster figures, things like that. But he says this book is really special, and you can't take the book away from the person who it started with, because the book co-develops with the person. He says, thenceforth, it will see all events and persons in relation to that girl, so to Nell, using her as a datum from which to chart a psychological terrain. Maintenance of that terrain is one of the book's primary processes. Whenever the child uses the book, it will then perform a sort of dynamic mapping from the database onto her particular terrain. I thought that was really, really interesting.
I read a really cool interview. Actually, it came out in 2024. It was an interview with Matteo Wong with Neal Stephenson. And Wong was interviewing Stephenson about this book, about the prescience of this book in a post-ChatGPT world and in a post-AI tutor world. I mean, here in China, I walk around the shopping malls all the time, and I see AI tutors being sold, to parents for their children. They come in things that look not dissimilar to this book, except they're usually plastic and kind of look a little bit like a laptop or a Kindle or something like that. But they're meant for kids to educate them. But Neal Stephenson said he has a really interesting like light bulb moment that gave him the idea for this primer. He says, the idea came to me after we had a kid and got this mobile that was designed to suspend over the crib. It had very primitive, simple shapes on it because when they're newborns, their visual systems can't resolve fine details. So there would be a square and a triangle and a circle. And then, after a certain number of days or weeks had gone by, you were supposed to pop those cards off the mobile and snap on a different set that had a more appropriate fit for what their brains were capable of that age. And that just got me thinking, what if you extended that idea to every other form of intellectual growth? Man's a visionary. I love it.
He's so interesting. One thing that I thought was very different from AI today, maybe not, but one thing that felt quite different to me is the ractors. Now we have another character, Miranda, and Stephenson is really good at keeping multiple, like, integral plots going. They feel almost like they're not related, but you can tell they're getting closer and closer to being woven and being completely like inseparable. But there's a Miranda plot who is the voice behind all of Nell's book conversations, because the book talks to her. The book is actually talking out loud, and it talks in real time. But this ractor situation, I've never seen anything like this. It's strange because as the book needs voice, it will kind of an actor will basically do the voice acting, and the script has to come really immediately. So as the book is telling its story, the book will speak with this ractor's voice. And the ractor is an actor, but they're being ractorized, which means they have these implants, like these tattoos in them, that can transform them into a completely different person. So if you're watching them, it looks like you're really watching Cleopatra. It looks like you're really watching Julius Caesar. But for her, her voice is being kind of put into this book. And I thought that was so interesting to have this artificial intelligence, yet to also have a human voice, but a human voice that is controlled by the artificial intelligence, because it tells her everything to say. But it still develops a real relationship, because as Miranda starts to see all of these crazy, as they say, they're like Grimm's fairy tales, they're really disturbing, whereas most of the other users of this primer, they have more regular, it's just the book teaching them, really. But hers, it's these really deep, twisted fairy tales. And Miranda starts to realize, I really think she's in danger, and I need to go and find her and rescue her. And I don't think she's got any family, so I'm going to try to raise her. I thought that was very interesting and different from our use of AI, our use of any large language model today, where there's a very human element, because the human is almost on the other side of the AI.
Yeah, you can see like half of this idea being applied in something like James Cameron's Avatar. You have people who are voicing it, but then all of their motions are being, detected, which is then formed as a basis for ultimately something that is being reconstituted on a 3-dimensional digital space, which is then recorded, but the camera can swing any direction. You know what I mean? Like, they're being recorded on all sides. So as a director, you're not filming the actors, you're filming the digital avatars of them, and you can adjust the camera, you can adjust the way their face looks, but then I guess in order to get to where Stephenson is describing, you would also then need to have like the same kind of malleability of a video game, or maybe even like a tabletop RPG, you would need to be able to interact with it in the same way that like a dungeon master in Dungeons and Dragons is interactable. I know a lot of people feel like this kind of technology is scary or fake or lame or something, but I do think that there's huge possibility for really interesting storytelling and really immersive storytelling to happen, if you can connect these kind of like disparate technologies into something that Stephenson is describing here.
I'm a Luddite, Zach. I just want to move in the woods. I don't want any of this, but I hate it all. But I think it is interesting in this story, because I'm not saying, why didn't Stephenson think of this? I'm just really curious about why he chose to have people still very interested in a human voice that is actually a live human voice. It seems very inefficient to have all of these ractors out there who are going to have to speak through all of these books, where today, sometimes it's even hard to tell if you're listening to a person or an AI. There's so many audiobooks on YouTube that I don't even know anymore if it's a real person reading them, especially if you turn up the speed a little bit. It just sounds 100% real. I wonder why people in this age are still choosing to have like the fake real human connection, or the real fake human connection.
I mean, probably for the same reason that people in this age want the real human connection. I mean, I think almost anyone you talk to, if they have a choice between listening to like a Notebook LM discussion of a book, or two human podcasters talking about the books and sharing their personal feelings and making some mistakes and going off topic a little bit, I think 10 out of 10 people are going to choose the human interaction, unless they're specifically looking for what AI has to say about something. But you get what I'm saying. Like the sense of humanness is infinitely compelling, and I think that people now understand that. And I don't think Stephenson was necessarily trying to make a point about that, but I think that even if it was something he hadn't considered at the time, I think he's fundamentally right that without a human in the loop, without a person being there to deliver some essence of humanity, you don't really have much.
I don't know. I'm afraid of the future, Zach. I keep going, through YouTube, and YouTube suggests to me these stupid videos all the time. And sometimes it's like they're quite frightening. One recently was, the headline was, "Boomers think this AI, what do they call it, trash or whatever, is real." And there are a lot of videos that look, completely convincing, but it is an impossible video. Someone will watch it and then they will, talk to their friends like, "Oh my God, did you see that? I can't believe that happened," but it's totally fake. I think, yes, maybe people would choose the real, or, real human interaction. But I think we are coming to a point, at least for many people, where you can no longer distinguish the real and the unreal. And this was nuts too. I think it's both. I think OpenAI and Grok are now going to do erotica. I think it's both of them. I don't know if you heard about this, but I thought that was very interesting too. Of now, like, they've created so many things that are fake, and now even like relationships have become fake and put onto OpenAI or put on ChatGPT. People have these relationships, and now they're going to have sexual relationships potentially with these different AI bots. I wonder if that will also start to not blend, I guess, real and not real, but make them impossible to distinguish. It used to be, magic and technology are indistinguishable until you learn what the technology is. But now it's going to be like, artificial intelligence and reality are indistinguishable.
Yeah. I hate to say it, I'm just not a doomer when it comes to AI stuff, just because like I think, yeah, things will change, but I see it more as in the long progression of change. Things have been changing for as long as I've been alive. I remember being 8 years old and, we hooked up our dial-up internet connection, and it's just been a whirlwind of, and now this, ever since. But so I agree with you that I think things will change. I agree with you that there will be people with unhealthy relationships to technology, but, I don't think that humanity is going away anytime soon, and I don't think the taste for real life will go away. In fact, I think that the pendulum is going to swing hard, and you're going to get some real Algernon Blackwood types, go disappear into the woods of Canada and have hunting dogs and trek mountains all the time. I see it happening, Bob. I see it happening.
I'm on for that life. That sounds great. That sounds wonderful. What do you think? There's a lot of posthumanism in this as well. So not just being tricked by AI or being, when we read not Blade Runner, the Vandroid's Dream of Electric Sheep, there is the Voight-Kampff test, and the idea is to find, does artificial intelligence have empathy? But I was thinking in this book, if the book already seems to have empathy, even if it doesn't, and you can test and find that it doesn't, my experience of it is that it does have empathy. So my experience of these things can no longer be distinguished with that kind of test. But I was wondering too, in this, we have people who are kind of becoming non-human. We have Bud at the very beginning, who has so many nanobot implants that he doesn't even have to go to the gym. But what does he say? It says it's like he is going to the gym night and day every day, and he's just getting bulkier, but he doesn't have to do any work. He even gets guns implanted into his forehead. He has become almost a robot, and there are many people like this. That's part of becoming a ractor too. You have to get these nanobot tattoo implants that will let you be transformed in front of everyone's eyes. I think that was an interesting element too of this, not just an AI that learns, but humans that become, they look like robots.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought there was a couple different integrations being shown here. What you're describing, the integration of machine technology into human wetware, that's cyborg stuff. We're describing cyborgs there. But the stuff with the drummers, I thought was the most interesting.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't think I've ever seen this kind of idea before in my life. And I think it's really helpful. You already talked about the Philip K. Dick book we just read last week, but in Philip K. Dick's book, the idea was a technologically mediated collective religious experience. The empathy box, you put your hands on it and you get this vision of people, of the religious figure of their time walking up this hill and getting pelted with stones. And you're there with them. You're walking up that hill too, getting pelted with stones. And it's this collective feeling that everyone shares, but it's religious vision is what it is. And it's really interesting. This book went a totally different direction, but it still had this kind of technology mediated connection between people. But this book had people, essentially be turned into like human transistors, with information being shared amongst them through sexual activity. It really, really interesting. But what I thought was particularly unique about this was that the kind of calculations they're doing as human transistors are happening in the like collective unconscious realm. You know what I mean? They're happening in the world of the unconscious, in the world of dreams, in the world of symbols. And this woman says to him, "Have I seen you before?" And he's like, "Well, it's possible that we've had the same dream." And she's like, "Well, lots of people have the same dream. That's a really common thing." He's like, "No, I'm talking about it's possible that in your dream, you were this person and I was that person. And we passed each other along the street and saw each other there." So like, this really goes back to what I was saying before about the use of the unconscious and symbols and the fantasy generating aspects of the human brain in order to teach people. But Stephenson also seems to be saying that maybe we can harness this for machine calculations. I don't think he's saying we should do this, but I think he's saying that it's possible to do it.
Yeah, I think they're kind of against it because I think Miranda gets sacrificed, is about to be sacrificed to the drummers and to be used as kind of a transistor, and they go and save her. And there's even like, going back to Snow Crash, almost a transference of data or a transference of something useful to computers through body fluids. So people are sharing data through swapping, even spit. So there's a kiss at one point, and they say, okay, that kiss has caused, the transfer of so much data. And I guess that's because when you integrate so much of the nanotechnology into your body, I guess they naturally can be transmitted quite easily. On a similar note, Zach, I thought one of the characters said something really interesting, and she's the madam that Miranda and Hollywood is Miranda's kind of boss and friend. They meet her, and she says there are two kinds of industry. One is the industry of things or stuff, and then the other is the industry of entertainment. And now, because they're so far in the future and they have all this nanotechnology, basically 3D printers using carbon can turn out anything. She says now that industry is over. It's done because everything has already been solved. The only industry now is entertainment, and that's my industry. And I was thinking, that is a weird world to be in. There are so many kinds of entertainment in here. Earlier, we talked about ractors and how there's a really nice kind of relationship between Miranda and Neal, where Miranda is the actor for the book, and it's like a kind of surrogate mother teaching her. But then there are also sorts of weird relationships where people have particular obsessions, and so they will go and pay a ractor to enact like a fantasy for them. And some of these fantasies are very formative. We have one scene, I think it's some military leader in one of the resistances, and he has this kind of thing for having to disclose secret information. So it's this kind of sex fantasy, but he also is actually being forced to give information in real life. But I thought that was just one example of this entertainment world where entertainment is tied up to very, very deep human psychology, and you can pinpoint exactly what you want because there's so many options in fantasy and in entertainment. So everything can be 100% customized. And it seems like if you're not one of the creators at the very top, you are either a servant, you're basically a slave at the very bottom, or you're just entertaining yourself to death.
I was also like piggybacking off that idea. I was really impressed by the way how when people are hooked into these machines, they're measuring like, heart rate, pupil dilation, blood pressure, things like that. So they can adjust the fantasy in real time to something that, to like A/B test their way into a fantasy that is more emotionally has more of an emotional hook to it than before, and they're keeping track of the way people react from one fantasy to the next, so they have a kind of baseline to operate off of. This is just like one of those many examples in Stevenson's books, maybe his writings in general, but this book where it's like he has so many ideas stuffed into this book. And
Mm,
there's that famous idea that like novels are containers. So, when you're writing a novel, it's really just about how many things can you fit in this box. How many
mm,
interesting ideas, how many observations, how many descriptions of feelings. Obviously you have the narrative, but let's just put on the timeline all of these different things. And this book is so overstuffed with incredible ideas that are given just like a 1 to 2 paragraph treatment and then gone.
mm.
Like he has this one moment in there where Hackworth is inside of a labyrinth, but the labyrinth is dynamically adjusting itself. So he can't just do the old
Oh
thing
yeah,
of like turning right every
so
time.
cool.
But then
Mm,
he finds that like, okay, so by changing what he's thinking about,
mm,
by changing the ideas that come into his head, he's able to create new pathways through this labyrinth and get out ultimately. I was like, I want to read a whole novel about this labyrinth. You know what I mean? Like, I want to know what happens here.
mm.
It's introduced and it's gone in like 3 paragraphs. The whole book is filled with stuff like this.
There's the other one about the Turing machines too that happens in the book, but Nell is able to now think so far beyond the book that she figures out that Turing machines cannot really convince her of their humanity. But in that whole scene, which is happening in like a fantasy castle, there is a dead king who is now a machine, but trying to trick Nell that he still exists as a human being. And eventually she solves all of these kind of Turing machine challenges, and she ends up at the top of the castle and sees he's just a skeleton there, but
Yeah.
the machine is still running itself. I thought that was a great, that's only a couple pages. That could also be its own full story.
Yeah. This book does something that I think I first encountered in Liu Cixin's Death's End, but he also does it
Mm,
here. And I'm quickly realizing that it's possibly one of my favorite moves that an author can make, which is to have a kind of parallel story running along, but have this story be a
mm.
kind of like Brothers Grimm style tale or fairy
Oh.
tale or just kind of like
Mm,
a mythic adventure of some kind that is being communicated parallel to the realist text that the A text
mm,
that's being presented, but in some way that parallel text comments upon or changes the primary text in some way, at least in the character's mind or the reader's interpretation of what's going on in the main text.
mm.
I love that stuff. I think it's so good.
It's so good, and it's so cool in this book because it's very key to the entire idea of the book too. Like, how well could a system do that? How well does it really bond with someone and adapt and change? And even like the examples earlier, it seems to almost know what will happen to them. When it presents the stranger, it's like, you're going to have to deal with this pretty soon. Let's talk about it now in the book. It's very cool how he's done these two parallel tracks and then also explored this science fiction idea through those parallel tracks.
I want to talk a little bit about genre because, you know, you could quite easily say that, oh, this is an SF book. Sure. Sure. But I don't think it's quite just that, because I was thinking about this as the book was ending. Imagine a grid, you know, and this book, it's not over here, it's not over there, it's not a point here, it's a whole range. So okay, so this book is simultaneously doing speculative fiction over here on the grid, and then over here, it's also simultaneously doing historical fiction because it's retelling
Mm.
the Taiping Heavenly Rebellion in China. So it's like it's set in the future, and yet everything is this cyclical retelling of past events. It's really, really interesting. So historical fiction and speculative fiction. But then on top of that, like if you have the vertical axis, this story is a family drama. It is the girl running
Mm.
away from her family in order to find her real mother, and the story ends with the uniting of the orphan girl at this point with her true mother. Very like emotionally and archetypically laden stuff to ground it in the family, and yet moving up on that axis, you have a civilizational drama. You have these great powers. You have the kind of fighting amongst these people. You have the journey from orphan girl to queen, being recognized by the Queen of England. So you get what I'm saying? Like, if you have the grid, this thing is just taking up every single spot of it, from the personal to the civilizational, from the historical to the far future science fiction, all in one text.
You forgot nanopunk, Zach. Nanopunk. Now, I think
nanopunk on one side, steampunk on the other.
Well, that's true. It's even steampunk. Oh, that's true. Good point.
Yeah.
The Victorians. I think, yeah, he's really able to do that because he does that with Snow Crash too. When you have the kind of, we're in the metaverse, we're in this world of computers, we're in this world of fantasy, we're also in a real world where there's a computer virus infecting real people. And then we also have the kind of talk between Hero and the computers, and this almost ancient history element to it. He's really good at being able to do that. And I really don't see how anyone could do that. That seems very difficult. If it's a container, how do you, when he's writing with paper, he's got his pen and his paper, how does he remember to keep like each side of the container up? He's putting all of these things in there, but it seems each side is defined by one of these things on the grid. How on earth do you not lose complete track of it? And I'm just left feeling like, how did he achieve this? And how did he also make me so interested in this story, which could easily fall apart, but it never does. You're reading it, it's like, yes, go become the queen, figure everything out, bring it to a good conclusion. And he is able to do that. And it's just mind-boggling.
Well, I don't know about you, but I didn't know what we were going to find when we picked out, 4 or 5 books to read about artificial intelligence, just to dip our toes in. And so far, I think we're 2 for 2 in terms of great books, really interesting ideas. Both of them have brought things to my mind that I think are really parallel to current AI discourse, but possibly they're just ahead of their time. I'm not really sure, but I think that both of them so far have really changed the way I think and widened my perspective. So I'm excited to continue this journey with you and just see what we find. All right. Talk to you later, Bob.
Talk to you later, Zach.